Good afternoon. I'm Warren Scheel, and this afternoon we have the pleasure of welcoming Judge Gretchen Taylor. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for joining me. Judge Taylor, I'm just going to, in a brief introduction, Judge Taylor's been a family law attorney, a family law judge in Los Angeles for 12 years, and now you're a private judge and mediator. Is that correct?
Correct.
Anything else you want to tell us about your practice and your role? Is it a signature resolution now, or?
Yes, I sort of hang my hat in an agency called Signature. My very first job was taking back bridal present returns at a place called Bullock's, which no longer exists anymore. And I think it was a presage of my career in divorce and dividing pots and pans and pets and kids. And you know, I've pretty much been in family dysfunction, to family treatment. I've been in child abuse. I did those things while I went to law school at night. So I sort of had a career already in dependency before I became a lawyer.
And now you wear a number of legal hats, as it were. You're a mediator. You do private judging. Can you explain for anyone who's actually going to watch this the difference kind of hats you wear as a mediator, special master, discovery referee?
Mediator is probably the hardest to define because it's an art to a great degree. Each mediator brings their own self and their instrument to a mediation in order to resolve conflict. And the art of mediation, if you will, is not necessarily a judge function at all. The art of mediation is giving people maybe the tools they need about the law, or exploring with them that this is probably maybe, you know, the likely outcome, but that they have self-determination and can do what they want. And as a result, many of my mediations are, as you know, Warren, attorney-driven. So the attorneys go, you know, down the road of divorce with their clients, and they hit a spot usually where the courthouse itself is saying, you know, we really don't think you've tried hard enough to settle this case. We really don't have courtrooms for you to try it. And the lawyers are saying to their clients, well, you know, in order to prepare for trial or even prepare for a court settlement session, which is free with a court judge, but I have to prepare, and you're going to have to give me X amount of more money of legal fees for me to get ready. And sort of at that point, lawyers will say to each other and say to their clients, let's try a private mediation. And a lot of lawyers feel more comfortable with a private mediation with a judge than with one of their fellow lawyers, which is just appearances. It has nothing to do with skill. But there's something about saying, well, this person used to be a judge and probably can, you know, really help us. And the mediation in that context is a very delicate task, because each lawyer has already sort of bonded with their client to a certain degree, even if they hate them. They've bonded with their problem. They've lived with their problem. They've worn it sort of like a bad suit for a long time. And so the lawyers have an idea about how this thing should resolve. This is what the end should look like. And I get in there, and frankly, my style is to sort of shake all of that up, to really brainstorm, to really look at all kinds of possibilities. And I generally always speak to clients with their lawyers, but I'll go sit next to the client and I'll get to know them during the mediation, and I'll ask them to tell me kind of what their important thing is or what their story is. And what happens is the mediation starts to have a life of its own. the lawyer starts learning things. In my mediations, lawyers learn things about their clients they had no idea. You know, strange stuff, trauma, you know, how their grandmother actually left them a lot of money, but he gambled it away and they never told their lawyer. And so it's in this sort of, I call it the understanding method of mediation, that these threads start coming together. And for lawyers who are able to see that a success is a client who can take the reins of usually already a pretty difficult and disastrous journey, who can take the reins and say, yes, I'm willing to do that, then lawyers are really very well served by mediating with me, because the clients themselves have actually really participated in the result. That clients aren't just, you know, having you say to them, no, well, this is what you should settle for, and you talking for them all the time. No, I operate kind of as a team. Now, Los Angeles, it's a caucus. So I'm going back and forth between each side. And I type as I go, and I build an answer. So mediation is kind of like surfing. The waves are high. Somebody hands me a board and I have to stay on, and hopefully at the end of the day have people sign. My job is to have people sign something.
That's a lot of information there. So going back to the beginning of your answer, is it necessary to have lawyers? If I'm just an ordinary person and I want to mediate my divorce, could I just contact you without lawyers and hire you?
I'm the only retired judge who works with people. So, and I don't understand per se. I think maybe for some retired judges who were never maybe client-centered lawyers themselves, or they lost that interest. Most of my fellows will say to me, don't give me a pro per. No, I don't want a pro per, don't want a pro per. And many of the lawyers in town will find that a client will come and say to them, look, I'm thinking of getting a divorce, and what do I need to do? And the lawyer says, well, I need $20,000. And the client says, well, before I give you that check, I'd like to try mediation. And so a lot of lawyers in town know that I mediate couples, and they'll say, well, go try Gretchen. And then, of course, the couples I've done, they call. And on those cases, I do it kind of like a workshop with education, so that they fully understand. If they leave me and go to see you, they're bearing the banner of I was educated by Gretchen Taylor, and they're, you know, and they're good consumers. And so, you know, that's in my field, in my work, it's about 30% of my business. The rest of it
that's a large percentage.
Well, it is. They keep coming. They keep coming, and they send their friends. And I do large estates, lots of very large estates. So I get a mediating forensic who puts on the mediation hat with me. And we do the balance sheets, and we do the discovery, and we do the tracings, and we do the disclosures, and we educate the client. And a lot of times they have business managers or accountants of their own.
In that kind of more complicated case where you're bringing in a forensic, for example, say there's complicated cash flow issues or business valuations. One of the questions I have, most of the reports and any information or opinions produced in a mediation is generally privileged, which you can't use if the mediation breaks down, unless, of course, the parties agree to that. So what if a party has retained a forensic accountant to value a business, and the forensic accountant has billed them, I don't know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and the mediation breaks down? Do you, at the beginning of the mediation, give the clients certain options as to whether they could use that report, or it would remain mediation privileged?
In general, I mean, if they came to me already having spent all that money, I would say let's hire a mediating forensic to just educate the other side in case it's a one-sided deal. But I generally have people hire somebody for the mediation on purpose. That way they can give a drone view and they don't have to be worried about their own malpractice or testifying or writing a report. And so the fee is lower. And I'm sure if they leave me, they'll say, well, you know, the CPA Gretchen sent us to, I mean, I've got a lot of these, frankly, you know, said, I really can't trace my you know, it's there. I came with a lot of stuff. I can't trace it. And of course, in the mediation, then we try to help people try to maybe understand that maybe they want to do the fair thing. Because a lot of mediations of couples are people who somehow want to either preserve the relationship, want to have some kind of dignity that they can show their children that they handled it themselves. They don't want to spend money on lawyers writing letters to each other. I mean, there's a lot of motivation for mediating it themselves. So I have a lot of people who do the morally correct thing. Not dollar for dollar, but you know, once we've looked at it, here's the legal thing, you know, you can't trace it. But
I mean, yeah, I mean, I can't cite to them, but there's studies from like the University of Chicago and other places that show the outcomes in mediation, once you factor in attorney fees, are as good, if not better, than litigation. I mean, not only are you saving a lot of money, but particularly where children are involved, the outcomes are better because it leads into a better long-term co-parenting relationship. Do you also bring in mental health experts when you're dealing with custody issues?
I do this with lawyers or with pro-pers, but I definitely do team mediations with lawyers. And in a typical case where they've got two accountants, I pry the accountant away from you, Warren, and I use 3 rooms, and then I get an accounting workroom where both accountants are working for me as if, you know, I was really the judge or the client, so that we can really have a conversation about the differences in why they chose, you know, 0.05 versus 1.2 or whatever the multiplication factor is. And then I've had a lot of people in the community know I'm you know, well versed in brain disorders, mental health, children with disabilities, alcoholism, drug addiction. And so people bring me those cases, and I've used a team approach with that. I brought in a forensic psychiatrist, and we've had various issues, you know, whether it's like somebody with Crohn's disease who has to take narcotic medication in order to live, or just people who are bipolar who, you know, they're doing good, but then they aren't doing so good. And how do you monitor that if you have a small child? You know, I find that to me, the whole field of mediation and special mastering is really just taking one subject and trying to decide it. But the way you decide it, obviously, is with people buying in, which is still mediation. You know, if you're going to decide something you want to hear, like I went out and I chose a preschool last year. I didn't want to choose a preschool.
When were your children last in preschool?
Well, I have an 8-year-old grandson, so I remember what I used to pay preschool not so long ago. So I remember the check. Yeah, I remember the check. But and of course the couple gave me 2 preschools. I didn't have 3, so it was either his preschool or her preschool, and they were vastly different. And so, you know, the mediation skill is still trying to get people to open up and really learn and look at options. And if they can't, then the judge hat is just making a call.
Well, let's run with a preschool example. In that kind of situation, I mean, the options, you could bring an educational consultant, or you can call the head of the schools and you can get more information. How did you get sufficient information or data to make that decision? One of the participants happened to be in national education issues. So I got this much material, a banker's box. The other parent was from a different country and wanted bilingual education with an emphasis on that country's traditions. And I went to each of the preschools. Oh, really?
I had to disclose that one of the preschools I had sent my own child to 40 years ago is still around. And then I interviewed the child because every child is a country, and there was. And between the psychological stuff from the parties and interviewing the kid and seeing both of the schools, I had two very different universes to choose from. The dig in the dirt, climb the tree, take your dress off and jump in the mud school versus the we're going to learn penmanship at 4 and Balzac.
Now, can I make a guess? You chose mud over Balzac.
I certainly did, partly because the child was under such a lot of stress that there wasn't an emotional safe place for this child between the parents and and they started fighting as soon as she was born. It wasn't a marriage, and it didn't have the glue of a family behind it. And I did. Yes, I did. I picked the mud. Not from my own personal leanings, because it was the school I had sent my child to 40 years ago. I picked mud for him too. But because I felt that child could really use the kind of, get on the mat and talk about how you feel. Johnny stole your lunch. How does that make you feel? Because she wasn't going to get that from her family.
At that kind of developmental age, the socialization skills are more important than academic skills. Learning to,
like I said, you make these decisions for people, and you just do the best you can. Then there's this PPC job, where people make me their parent. That's
Before we go to the PPC, sorry to interrupt there, but you said something about, and this is I don't usually interrupt judges.
Oh, please, I'm not a judge.
You can get in big trouble for interrupting judges.
Call me Gretchen.
Thank you. Call me Warren. Is you mentioned about talking to the child, and there's something I feel very strongly about, that it's really important to have input from the child. And in California, as we know, at a certain age, the child can even address the court and tell the court what their preferences are. But that doesn't preclude you from just talking to the child and getting to know the child. I know that some judges feel that that's best done by maybe a child therapist or a psychiatrist or psychologist. But you personally talk to the children. What are your feelings about that, and what guides you when speaking to particularly young children?
It's very different in a courtroom setting. Marching a child through metal detectors, cops, flags, people in black robes, being there with their parents, that kind of pinnacle experience of people having to go to court is entirely different than interviewing a child outside of that environment. And so I very rarely, as a judge, had children. I had teenagers come and testify from time to time, and I'd take them in chambers. Outside of the courthouse, I've taken more education than I know what to do with. So I've taken child interviewing, and back in the day when I was in child abuse, we had Stewart House and, child sexual abuse interviews. And, so I'm a fairly trained person. And, I think the biggest thing people miss when they're interviewing a child is they think it's interviewing. And it's really much more experiencing. If you experience a child, you can experience their temperament, their anxiety level, how comfortable they are with each parent, how easily they separate, without, frankly, having to do any interviewing other than just plunk yourself down in the middle of whatever the child's life is and observe. And, some kids are timid and some are bullies, and, and then to me, the real kind of glue is to fit the child into a plan, whether it's a parenting plan or a school or Lord forbid, sleepaway camp. I mean, some kids should never go to sleepaway camp. It's just too traumatic for them. It's not like every kid can go to, Camp Awani and have fun by the fire. So to me, interviewing children is an important thing if it happens. I've got people who work with me in a team, therapists. I've got Lisa Hacker. She brings a dog now. So the dog goes from room to room just to comfort the parents.
What an emotional support dog.
Yeah. So,
So are you in, and say hi to Lisa from me. So if you do decide to speak to the children, have a conversation with them, would it be in your office, or would you go to their home and meet separately with each parent and the child? How would that work?
Well, with the preschool child,
Yeah.
I observed her at her preschool she was already in a preschool before the decision had to be made. It was a different one. So I observed her amongst her peers in the preschool without her really even knowing I was there, talked to the teachers, hung out, watched her. And then I had the parents have an exchange in front of me, sort of at a conference room where I work. And that way I got to observe both the parents with the child, watch an exchange, see the child, and, I don't think I said anything to the kid except I carry hand puppets. So I pulled out my hand puppet. My grandson is OCD on penguins. So I have about 20 penguins. I've got more penguins than I know what to do with. So I took one of my penguins and talked to
I'm not going to ask you to pull out one of your penguin.
Trust me, I've got
puppets hit now.
I got
Don't worry.
Yeah. So I sat there with her, and they said, this lady's helping us. And I talked to her through my hand puppet and, kind of got a feel for what was going on in her life. But until children are really older, the whole interviewing a child really is much more about finding understanding. I'm big on the word understanding.
Yeah, it's really very much an art form. You have to be trained and experienced in talking to children to really be able to at least make decisions and understand where they're coming from. And you have the experience. In that kind of case, or the more complex case, what I'm hearing is that mediation might take place over quite a few sessions over a period of time.
Yep.
And I'd be correct. First, I think the outcome is probably better for the parents and the child, but also it's going to be a lot less expensive than litigating. Could you talk to me about litigation expenses and why, from a purely financial point of view, it's a better idea to mediate?
Well, the problem with litigation is it's a one-shot deal. You get a piece of paper at the end of it. And life isn't like that. People aren't like that. So yes, it's handy for a financial question because there is sort of an answer. Do I get the house or do I not get the house? One of those kind of things. But when it comes to children, the question about your children changes sometimes monthly, daily, certainly every 6 months, depending on their maturity level, depending on things going on. And to think that paying a lawyer, no matter what you're paying them, to go to court to get an answer now, 4 months from now, maybe? In COVID time, the time's even longer, but before it was, go to court, see a judge 3 months from now to get an answer about whether the kid can go to Switzerland for Christmas. Mm-hmm. So now you got the Switzerland for Christmas, but next year it's like, we want to change schools. The kid fell in love with, speaking German in Switzerland. Things about people change. And the beauty about having sort of a team or people that you trust in the community, whether it's therapists or accountants or lawyers or mediators or other professionals, is you can call the team together And as you move along in life, you can say, you know, let's talk again. I've still got a case in mediation from when I started 10 years ago. Not maybe 9 years ago, because maybe I had them after the first year. And I told them, I said, oh my God, your children are teenagers and going to Israel for, you know, the birthplace trip that young people go on. And, you know, and they were like twins and one the next, you know, so they're like these 3 boys that did this all the time when I met them, that were like 3 and 4. And they had a portfolio of businesses, big businesses here in town. And it was pretty hard to think if they'd, you know, be worth anything. What are we going to do? And so the wife decided, you know, in my mediation way back when, she was going to ride with the husband in the businesses. And we broke them up and gave her a 50% share. And I don't know that if I'll see them back again or not, but we've been mediating, breaking up the businesses, selling them, what to do with them, the answer on support, those kinds of things. Every year they come back, they sit down, we have the accountants, everybody talks. We look at the balance sheet, decide, are we going to refinance the building that's now very appreciated?
Well, that is a very tangible benefit of mediation, because in court, generally, because of the family code, the courts are encouraged not to reserve jurisdiction, but to divide properties. And that's something I've always been for, where there's a small, closely held business. You know, maybe the wife wants to remain it's usually the wife, the outspouse, wants to remain a sleeping partner in the business, continue receiving dividends, and also if the business gets sold, then she gets a share of the business as well. So do you work with business attorneys as well to craft, you know, good shareholder agreements, that kind of thing?
I mean, I have them, but usually these people already have multiple layers of people. And I can't say that in this particular case, they did very much other than, you know, reorganize their shares. And her point was well taken, which was throughout the marriage, all of his efforts were plowed back into the businesses as opposed to cash being taken out. And he was going to continue to do that until they reached the pop spot and, you know, became like a diamond that somebody wanted to offer a lot of money for, which
Right.
has happened. And so she said, you know, I mean, we've invested all that time and money, and I put in my separate property inheritance while we were on, and I'm hoping it'll pay off. And it did. And they weren't happy. I mean, they weren't a happy couple. She would get on a chair every year and give him the soapbox, which is, I never would have had 3 children in 2 years if I thought you were going to divorce me.
Yeah, no, I've heard the same thing over and over again. You mentioned earlier, I think, well, when you've had these cases that have gone on for a long time, you're making these, or you're helping people make decisions as a mediator, you also have the power, if the parties agree, to be appointed a judge or a PPC to make decisions for them. Can you explain what those roles are?
I can explain those roles. I don't usually, I mean, I don't switch hats. No, I believe there's an ethical a barrier to mediating versus being a judge. And unless people sign up in the beginning for something that we call MEDARB, which means, you know, I'm going to make the decision, but I'll try to help you decide it first. I don't believe that mediation clients should have the mediator switch hats on them and become a decision maker. I think that's very uncomfortable. So I like people to have me be the decision maker from the start. And if I can settle it, great. And I do that just like the courthouse does with what I call case management conferences. So we're talking about the case, and, you know, they understand that we're not going to just have a call your first witness. I mean, I can do that if that's what you want, but most people, in family law, we're dealing with so many different undercurrents. You know, it's just not a tax case. It's life. And so lawyers are, lawyers are usually looking, I think, to the judge or to the mediator for some help with those undercurrents so that they can do kind of the more intellectual, answer, yes, you're going to get the house, and yes, you're going to get X amount per month. And then the undercurrent is, well, what am I going to get when I'm 65?
Well, I think people from other jurisdictions, particularly other countries, are surprised when you tell them in California, you could appoint a private judge to make decisions, even decisions regarding custody.
Right.
Because in a lot of other countries, and I think a lot of other states, particularly when it comes to custody, that's the sole prerogative of the public court system. What are the advantages to having a private judge, do you think, over going to public court?
Well, I do a small job of just signing and entering judgments. So once it's mediated and settled, lawyers in town and my own clients hire me to just be a judge just for the pen. And that's partly just because paperwork has become dysfunctional, and it's become even more so during COVID. Having a private judge, if you can afford it, because it's expensive, and what one would say against it is it gives sort of a private fast track to those with money. And my response to that is, unfortunately, there's a private fast track for those with money in everything. They go in the back door of the nightclub. They don't go through the front door. So that's one of the things that's distasteful about it, in a sense, is that people with money can actually purchase, quiet, separate, fast, efficient justice. The good news is that middle-class people don't realize how much they're going to spend on their divorce when it starts. So by the time they've finished with a middle-class divorce and they've spent their 401k and all the available cash and a home equity line on getting to the court, stopping and starting and stopping and starting, and having discovery and not having everybody in charge and having the judge changed, they could have saved 2/3 of it had they signed up for a private judge in the beginning. So it's fast, efficient, somewhat private, even though it's posted publicly. But, you're in a nice setting, down to business without other court business. Unfortunately, most judges are bothered all the time by, here's a file, here's a domestic violence case, judge, I need you to do this. And so a sitting judge is interrupted all the time by something else that's taking precedence. And you don't have, a full day might be 2 hours.
I do a lot of prenups, particularly international prenups. And in most of my prenuptial agreements, there's a choice of law and choice of forum provision. And one of those provisions is that if there's a dispute, particularly if there's a foreign jurisdiction, the parties will agree to have a retired family court judge with a certain amount of experience to render opinions on the enforceability of the prenup, on how the prenup affects the division of property. Do you ever get involved as an expert or as a judge in those kind of foreign cases?
Yes, I've been an expert. I'm careful about what expert jobs I take because this is a small, fairly tight-knit community. And so if I feel that there's going to create any kind of conflict of interest in terms of either my longstanding relationship with certain people, I'll say, no, I really can't do that. I get asked, unfortunately, to be an expert in fee disputes. And a lot of times it's the fee dispute between the attorney and the client, and I have no problem there. But I've had several where it's between one attorney and another attorney. And that can be fairly uncomfortable. So I give a very close kind of sniff test to expert jobs to make sure that I feel really totally unbiased and totally neutral about the opinion.
Understood. I just want to sort of wrap this up, and when I say wrap it up, I'm using it in a very kind of loose way, because this is a big question. How has this pandemic, this COVID pandemic, affected families and your practice?
I may see a different slice of life than others. So I'll speak just to the slice of life that I'm seeing. Um, I would say in general, I have seen families that withstood a great deal of stress before now for various things that were happening in their families. And COVID and its economic effect, as well as its health effect, has been just the finishing nail in a almost a death knell of people wanting answers. People constantly want answers, but they don't have the wherewithal to get the answers because we don't have answers. When will the pandemic be over? When will income come in again? You know, if we sell the house, is it going to be a depressed price? Will the price be less next spring? There's just so much uncertainty on top of situations that were already shaky that I'm seeing people having a very hard time making any decisions. They're asking for help, but they're having a really hard time pinpointing kind of what the outcome should be. You know, should I take the rental house or should I take the family residence? I got two or three of those right now.
Are you seeing an uptick in your cases, the kind of caseload you have, because more people now have to go to mediation instead of the public court system, which by and large, with a few exceptions, such as domestic violence, is sort of closed or at least delayed for a very long time?
There's definitely an uptick, and there's a lot of requests for almost what we call in our business an RFO, which is an initial understanding about who gets the house, what's the temporary support, how much money. I've had quite a few cases where they sold the house last year and the money's been sitting in escrow for a whole year until COVID came. And now, you know, everybody wants to, you know, divide it up, but the question is, how much do the lawyers get? How much is separate property? So I've had quite a few of those too, where people have been sort of sitting on their problem, and COVID has accelerated their desire to have it resolved.
What's your approach been in the area of cash flow, where people's incomes have been greatly either reduced? I mean, you said you represent a lot of high net worth cases. So maybe in some of your cases, their net worth and cash flow has increased dramatically. So given the uncertainty of cash flow, at least in the next 12 months, what's your approach been to counseling or mediating those kind of cases where people really need support to pay their bills? And on the other hand, the higher earning spouse or parent just doesn't have the same kind of income in the near future. Have you developed an approach to those cases?
I've been using the tried and true approach, Warren, which is a percent. So I've been defining whatever the new lowered income level is, and having people, frankly, several of them report quarterly as opposed to yearly, report quarterly. And in the cases where I've had a mediating forensic, then the forensic is helping people to, you know, look at their books so they don't have to talk to me. You know, the forensic's cheaper than I am. So we kind of put him in the mix of the agreement, which is they'll sit down with, you know, the books and records and figure it out. But there's so many people without anything. They're living on savings. Banks aren't handing out money like they used to. They're shy. Lenders are shy. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a long time before our situation, our family law kind of business, becomes routine. If it ever was routine, but now I think it's each situation is really unique and requires a unique answer. It's not just any one size fits all. But people need relief. People need money and people need relief. But it's I used to say to people, you know, I'm a judge here in the courthouse, and it's not a cafeteria, and I'm only serving green Jell-O. And you keep asking me for red Jell-O, and I just don't have it. I can't give you red Jell-O. And so people want answers to all kinds of things. They want the red Jell-O when neither you nor I have it, even for ourselves. We can't see. I mean, I keep thinking there's a cliff out there of pent up hunger and lack of ability for people to have the necessity of shelter, that will start to go like this, which is, and then the real estate that lies under it that is not getting the income, and then the restaurants that aren't going to reopen, and that our lives and our generation, and unfortunately I'm kind of old, I may not see it bounce back.
Yeah. I mean, I presume you adopt the same approach when it comes to assets and businesses, which is a sort of wait and see approach, because if you value something today, who knows what it's going to be in like 6, 12 months time.
Right. Well, I've got
we kind of saw that in 2008, I think, was a real problem.
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 where we've hung on to the business and it's out there dangling as to when it should be sold.
Well, I want to say thank you ever so much. This has been a very interesting and enlightening discussion. And I just say it again, I'm a divorce lawyer in Los Angeles. Been doing this for 30 years. I started off in the UK, practiced with legal aid in New York, and now I do solely divorce and family law in Los Angeles, California. And how can we, if an attorney or a member of the public wants to find you, Gretchen, how do they contact you and retain you?
There's bad stuff and good stuff on Google, but Gretchen Taylor will we'll get you there.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, and stay safe, and enjoy your next Zoom.
Thank you.
Take
care, Warren. Have a wonderful weekend.
And you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.